And this one is about Briahna Joy Gray. And man, oh man, is she really they are really coming after her on Twitter the past day or so. I'm going to show you the video that's in question about that as well. So this was from Bri earlier. I think this thread may be longer now. But she said, "Stop bullying Black women. Eve, my Black body is under assault, and during Black History Month, no less." SMH. Now, where is this coming from? So this came from Eve Barlow. And Eve said, "Your need to dismiss and bully a Jewish female activist who spends more time speaking on this matter than you can comprehend is deplorable and indicative of a bias you seem to have about punching up at Jews." Oh my God, you guys. Okay. So I'm just following the thread back, and then I'm going to show you the video that they're talking about. So Eve was responding to a tweet that Bri had here where she said, "Yes, this week on the pod, I, a Black person, advocated for Nazi race science along with my Jewish co-hosts." Of course, she's being sarcastic here. Anyway, check out this terrific episode in which we discuss Whoopi's suspension and whether Blacks and Jews should adopt understanding of race invented by our oppressors. And Jordan said, "This week on the pod, Nazi race science." People really took this the wrong way. Like that thread, I think, is still going on. This was the tweet here that started it. And this was Bri posting her "Are Jews White? Does It Matter?" This is an episode from Call-In, from that app Call-In that she had, which people can connect their Call-In show to their YouTube show. So you might see the video version on YouTube and then see like the audio version on Call-In, but people can call in and ask questions. So she just announced basically, like, I'm talking about "Are Jews White? Does It Matter?" on the Debrief with Briahna Joy Gray. Basically just advertising her show. People lost it. This person said, "This isn't your discussion to have." I could tell they obviously didn't listen to the show. This person said, or what's her name? Amy said, "And with a single sentence, you just erased all the Jews who are Black or Asian or any other race, but go on with your bullshit." Jeez. Sorry. John said, "Stupid and unnecessary question. Yes, some of us Jews are white, and also some of us are not white." I can't read this person's name, but they said, "Why is this even a discussion? Jews aren't white. We're Middle Eastern, just like Arabs aren't white, but rather Middle Eastern. The Jewish experience isn't white either." Saint Laurent said, "Opening a future episodes with hello friends." Life is a Grift said, "Sounds like another Whoopi discussion of pure ignorance." So, as you can see, and I don't know, let me check and see if anything else was said after this. This is why I told you guys a lot of times I just don't respond to, like, when people attack me on Twitter, and I get attacked a lot. I really don't care though. But I don't respond. I do not respond. I'm just like, whatever, dude. I don't have time for it. But here's another one. They're trying to get me censored from Twitter by reporting me for anti-Semitism. By the way, people are calling her anti-Semitic now. You see how this escalated very quickly? Guess they really don't want you to hear this excellent podcast. So I guess this is a complaint that she received from Twitter. Oh, let me go back that way. It was bigger. "Hello. Twitter is required by German law to provide notice to users who are reported by people from Germany via the Network Enforcement Act reporting flow. We have received a complaint regarding your account for the following content: tweet text, cry victim, LOL, getting a strong there can only be one true victim and it's not Black people vibe here, which is the opposite of the solidaristic vibes we were cultivating on the show that none of these people watch. By the way, I could tell they didn't watch the show either, because I did watch it and I'm like, wow, they really took this to another level. Did they even listen to what was said in the show? Some people were saying like she should have had Jewish people on the show. Jewish people were on the show. So that's how I knew they didn't watch the show. So it was just really weird, very strange. But let me go back into this because they really came after her, man. It goes on to say, we have, we have investigated the reported content and found that it is not subject to removal under the Twitter rules or German law. So she was reported. And by the way, you guys, let me tell you something. This has been going on Twitter a lot recently, where there's these DM groups and they target certain people and they'll mass report you. It's happened to people that I know. And what happens is, I think if you get enough people to do it, then Twitter can like either take you down or suspend you for like a week or whatever. But that's been happening on Twitter. That's why I told you a lot of times I just ignore. I don't have time. I don't have time. But so yeah, they reported her. And I don't think I can play the call-in one because that might be copyright, but I'm going to play the video, part of the video, so you can see that. But Jesus, like, I don't even know what to say. I'm not shocked though. I'll be honest with you, just because Twitter sometimes can be a very toxic place. I'll just be honest with you. And it's easy to buy into that. So let me play the video that you all can see. And I want you to tell me if you think there's anything wrong with this conversation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Boy, let me tell you, man, they really will come after you when they're ready. They will come after you. So this, what they're referring to is canceling Whoopi for racism with Batya, Ungar, Sargon, and Thomas. I can't see the rest of Thomas's name, but here we go.
Batya, if you have interrogated that question at all, what do you think at bottom was the problem with Whoopi Goldberg's with statements on The View?
So like a lot of Jews I know, my feelings and thoughts about it have evolved in the, the weeks since it happened. At first it was very shocking and horrifying, but then of course, talking to Black friends and talking to other Jewish friends, okay, so what I've arrived at, what I think is, well, my current understanding of her comments, which obviously I reserve the right to change as somebody who thinks it's really important to change your mind when you're wrong. So I think that this is how I would summarize it right now. I think she made 3 mistakes and got at 2 potentially very true things. So the mistakes I think she made are what you mentioned already. The Holocaust, of course, was about race. Hitler thought Jews were, an inferior race, right? Just historically completely wrong. Of course, you can have bigotry against minorities who are not Black. That also seemed to be precluded by what she was saying. So I'd say that was the second mistake. She seemed to be making that kind of, I'm sorry, forgive me, but like that woke, analysis where, oppression and skin color are correlated. And that is the definition of, oppression, victimization, and people who have lighter skin cannot be racially oppressed or ethnically oppressed, which is not true. And the third thing I would say is, Jews are not white. So, Jewishness is not a race. Most Jews do not consider themselves to be a race because, as I'm sure you guys agree, race is a social construct. Jewishness is difficult to define because Jews predate the modern categories we have for thinking about these things,
Okay. Now, if you notice, the young woman Batya, she was the one who asked the question. She was the one, that addressed the question. She was the one that said Jewish people are not white. So that didn't come from Brie. That came from her guest, who is Jewish. And that's why I thought to myself, all the people that were attacking her, it was obvious that they didn't watch this video, because they were saying, how about you bring on Jewish people and have them talk about it? There we go. There's Jewish people there on the video. So that was very strange to me. And she's the one who brought it up. So I'll go back into the video and I'll tell you what else I think about this.
So it's sort of the definition of Judaism sits uncomfortably at the intersection of an ethnicity and a history and a religion and a culture and a language and, you know, a set of texts, right? It's a difficult thing to define, but it's most Jews would not call themselves white. They might call themselves white passing if they have white skin like me. I sometimes say that, but the reduction of Jews into whiteness is something that many Jews find extremely offensive. Now, what I want to say, and now I want to get to the two things I think that she very clumsily perhaps was gesturing at.
So that part was actually pretty interesting because my Jewish friends do call themselves white. They do consider themselves to be white. So I don't know. But I mean, you know, people, it's just like with black people. Like black people are not a monolith. You know, not everybody thinks the same. People have different opinions, but that was interesting to hear.
That I think are really important to bring up and difficult to bring up. So the first is anti-Black racism is different. And it's worse in America. The history is worse. The current way in which we are still failing descendants of slaves is worse than what any other ethnic minority suffers in America, certainly Jews. I mean, American Jews in this generation, we are the luckiest Jews to ever walk planet Earth. It's ridiculous to compare what Jews go through today, even as anti-Semitism is on the rise, with forms of anti-Black racism that are still state-sponsored. So that's the first thing that I think she was clumsily gesturing at, which is what they do to us is different, like at some qualitative level. And I think that I agree with her on that, even though I think she did not say it very well. And the second point, which I think is probably even more controversial, is this, and then I'm going to cede the floor back to you guys. I think that there is a kind of a stolen valor happening when you have these groups that represent different minorities, Jews, immigrants, Muslims, Asians, Latinos, all sort of trying to get on this, you know, intersectional train and say, look, fighting oppression for everybody is intertwined. And I just think that that's ridiculous. Because again, like what we did and what we continue to do to the American descendants of slaves is qualitatively different. It is qualitatively worse. And to the extent that she was trying to point that out, that there is this kind of, you keep asking the Black community to lend its voice to these other things that are bad. They're bad. Anti-Semitism's bad. But come on, like where are our priorities, right? When we're thinking of levels of, you know, oppression that still remains. So I think that those are the two things that, you know, clumsily she was gesturing at that I do think are important to talk about.
I want to chime in here and talk about this from a local perspective. What she just mentioned about the difference between oppression between Jewish people and Black people. I was thinking about this after I watched this video. There's a neighborhood right next to Boston. Looks like it actually is Boston, but it's not. It's called Brookline. And Brookline is a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. I think it's been that way for a long time. And I thought to myself, yes, there have been, you know, anti-Semitic graffiti in Brookline. Like those things have happened. But then I thought about the type of oppression that happened in Black neighborhoods in Boston, like Roxbury or parts of Dorchester, because not all Dorchester is Black community. Mattapan, I thought about that. And I had to say to myself, you know, yes, there's discrimination that happens to both groups. But one of the things I noticed when we talk about oppression, if you go into Brookline, Brookline is very wealthy. It is a wealthy community. I can't afford to buy a house there. Most people I know cannot. There's a lot of older money there too, where people have generational wealth that's been passed down. The schools are excellent, phenomenal. And yet, if I were to go into Roxbury or Dorchester or Mattapan, and then you see the disparities, you see systemic disparities. The schools are not good. There's cops all the time patrolling those neighborhoods. The crime rate is high because that links back to poverty. I told you poverty and crime are connected most of the time. And I have to say that I think something happened in this country when it comes to Black people and when it comes to like the Jewish community. Because I know, Jewish people went through the Holocaust, which is tragic and terrible. But Jewish people did receive reparations from Germany. Jewish organizations received reparations from Germany. Black people never did. So when slaves were freed, there were all of these tools that white people had that they didn't have. Like, it was illegal for slaves to learn how to read and write. So you were basically starting from the bottom. But what I've noticed, especially up here in the Northeast, a lot of these communities that I've lived in the Jewish neighborhood when I lived in Brooklyn. It seemed like the Jewish communities, they built up their own communities, schools, and businesses, and they're still around. When Black people tried to do this, there were multiple Black Wall Streets. They were burned to the ground. In fact, every time, because the Black population in the United States was actually the strongest during Reconstruction. A lot of people don't talk about that sometimes, but there were different like Black communities in the United States that were able to build up wealth, like in those communities where like all the businesses were Black owned. So the dollar constantly turned in that community, right? They were all burned to the ground. It wasn't just Tulsa. So, I mean, people know how I feel about reparations. I do think Black people need reparations. But when I look at the differences, I see a lot of systemic issues when it comes to the Black community, like the public education system. That needs to be improved. But if you're going to fund the public education system based on property taxes, that's the big problem. That's the big problem. I don't want people to go call me anti-Semitic. That is not where I'm at all. But I did want to talk about the differences that I see. I think that's important to note. But let me go back into the video.
So, I mean, there's a lot there, and I want to circle back to some of it. But I want to get your read on one of the first things. I want to get your read, Thomas, on one of the first things that Batya said, which was this idea that Jews aren't white and don't have a self-perception of white as being white. And I was with you so much, Batya, through a lot of that. But it does seem to me in an American context, in particular, I mean, that's the only context I can really speak to. I don't think that people are looking at, high-profile folks. Jared Kushner, for some reason, is the first thing that pops into my head. Barbara Streisand, whomever, and thinking that person isn't white. I mean, Thomas, you make so much, you talk and write so much about these questions. When you think about race in America, are you encountering a conception of Jewish people that is non-white? Or is it white and an ethnic identifier on top of it, the same way you have like white Latinos, let's say?
Well, no, it's different than white Latinos. I mean, this idea of monolithic whiteness is newish. It's not so old. It's not so old that there are not people living who can remember a time when their grandparents could tell them that Irish and Italians were not participating in what we now think of as like seamless kind of monolithic whiteness.
Certainly historically.
You were also in,
and I would say
20th century.
Sure, but I would say also, there's literature, the book famous, Becoming White or whatever it is, where Jews, Italians, a lot of different people were considered not white. But today, I mean, what is your
today? There's a concept of monolithic whiteness that is new. It's kind of strange. I have a lot of problems with it because I think it flattens and erases enormous ethnic and cultural and historical differences. I actually did a podcast a long time ago with Mark Oppenheimer and Alana Newhouse at Tablet. I was asking them if they consider themselves white, and they both rejected that they were white. And that was something that I would encourage more Jews and other kind of ethnicized white people to do more in speech and language, is to assert a kind of difference that that subverts this monolithic identity. I also was really, and this is maybe getting on a tangent, but I really liked what ADOS was doing when they were saying, we want to not have monolithic Blackness. And we want to say that there are ethnic differences with real historical trajectories. And so that a Jamaican is not the same as a 13th generation sharecropper from Louisiana or Mississippi. I think that these distinctions matter. I think that race itself is a mistake, coming out of plantation logic and domination for economic purposes. And so that all of these things should make us pause and think, why are these words so fuzzy? Why do they mean so many different things to different people? And what would it do to us if we had much more sophisticated and specific ways of talking about ourselves that didn't fall into the kind of easy rhetoric of, well, the Holocaust was white on white violence. That I think we need a much better conversation than that. So Whoopi definitely erred, but she did stumble into something that was poignant. And I think that's why we're still talking about it now.
Well, Thomas,
So that's interesting. I'm gonna go to some of the comments, and I have something I want to say about this. Oh, thanks so much, LPA Film. You're nailing it, Sabby. This is what no one talks about when it comes to reparations. Yeah, I think when my mind, how my mind goes there when someone mentions oppression, I mean, as a Black person, I think about these systemic issues. Yeah, there's racism everywhere. I mean, look, I've lived overseas. I've lived in the United States, North, South. I've lived in different places. And one thing I can tell you is racism is everywhere. It doesn't matter. It's not, racism doesn't have a home to a specific region. And I want to say that because when I lived in the South, people used to say like, oh, well, the South is really racist. And I moved up North and I realized people are racist here too. So it doesn't have a specific home per se. And I've seen these things happen. I've seen people, hateful things said to people who were Jewish, of course, Black, in my own experiences being Black, some of the Asian, especially some of the students that come here to Boston, I've seen some of the things that have been said to them. So it happens to a lot of us. But I think what's important to think about is the systemic issues, because it is difficult to find a way out of that. How do you beat a system that is designed to work against you? Now, that doesn't happen with everybody. There's always exceptions where some people have found a way to get out of that system, right? But it doesn't happen for the majority. And I've said this multiple times too, that it is really hard to get out of poverty. This is why you have generations of, just like you have generations of wealth, you have generations of poverty. It is difficult to get out of it if you don't get help from somebody else. It's hard, right? So I think we need to focus on the systemic issues when we're talking about racial issues in this country. I think that helps a lot. Noli D, thanks so much for the super chat. She knew what that title would do. I don't feel sorry for her. That title was pure bait to get people to hit the hornet's nest. Ouch. Noli D. Oh boy. Tony Plow said, my question is, how could Whoopi think that people wouldn't be offended? Whoopi has said some cringe that, look, let me tell you, Tony, Whoopi Goldberg has said some cringe statements on The View, and even before she was on The View. So she strikes me as, you ever met someone that has no filter? That's how she kind of presents herself sometimes. Like, it's like she has no filter. So she just says whatever comes out. But what I wish would have happened, and when Jackson Hinkle was on here, we had this discussion because that was right after she was suspended. What I wish would have happened, instead of them suspending her, I wish they would have had a discussion about that, like on The View, like a group discussion about what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be Jewish in the United States. Like, I felt like that would have been more beneficial than just suspending someone. I don't know. I mean, I understand what Whoopi was trying to say, but you know how it is, you guys. You know how it is in this country. I wish they would have just had a discussion about it. I told you I don't like the whole like cancel people, fire people, suspend people. Like that doesn't get anything resolved. The best thing to do is to educate people. Seems like we don't want to do that sometimes in this country. It's just easier just to write people off. Sadness, sadness. Mr. X says Mitch McConnell said black people got reparations. They got a black president. Yes, he did say that. He so did. Oh my God, cringe. DJD14D says I defined white not as a skin color, but a collection of behaviors and ideas. That is interesting. You'll have to tell me about that sometime. Saul said whiteness is inclusive when it needed to oppress Black Americans. Woof! The fire is coming out tonight. Oh man, ladies and gentlemen. Astral Gypsy, what's up? Says it may be shitty, but I just think Whoopi is all that sharp. I don't think Whoopi is all that sharp. I think it was simple lack of understanding. The View isn't exactly the gold standard for intellectual achievement. There you go. There you go. Oh, Mark said Whoopi is Black, Jewish, convert, racist, and very rich. How much does she send to poor Blacks? Oh, Mark, you can't bring up the class issue. You can't bring up the class issue, Mark. Don't you know people get mad at you for doing that? Just kidding. Just kidding. Definitely bringing that up on this show. I talk about it a lot. All right. So I think that is all I'm going to show from that video. The conversation does go on, but if you want to see the rest of it, I mean, it is on Bad Faith podcast. And I think there's 30 minutes of this episode and the full episode is probably on Patreon.